Hello and welcome to Talking Books. I'm Jill de Villiers. A revolution is taking place in the marketplaces of the informal sector. The KaziNomic Revolution may still be a murmur in the streets, but it is the future of the African economic activity. That is according to GG Alcock, the author of KaziNomic Revolution, The Rise of Africa's Informal Economies. Gigi, thank you so much for coming into the studio to talk to us about your book.
Thank you.
I'd like to start with how you grew up, because it's quite an unusual story.
Sure.
You are white, but you are actually also Zulu.
Sure.
You're one of the few people who can cross the boundaries into the Zulu world. Sure. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I guess when we were kids, we always felt we were terribly underprivileged because our parents were community activists, and they believed that the only way to change people's lives and be trusted by people was to live just like them. So they more or less gave everything that they owned away and built a mud hut in a Zulu village in a place called Msinga in KwaZulu-Natal. At the time, in fact, it still is the poorest place in the country, and at the time one of the most violent parts of South Africa. And we grew up, my mother taught us at home under an acacia tree, and in fact she still lives just like that. And we grew up as Zulu kids, stick fighting, herding goats, and all that came with being a Zulu. And I think, one of the things was that when I grew up, I said to my father, would he afford to send me to university? And he said no, he wouldn't be able to. And I guess that upbringing, I realized that understanding the cultures, the language is just one component, but the cultures, the behavior, the lifestyles of people in that environment was quite unique. Yeah.
But the language gives you an in an area where white people don't normally.
Yeah, it's more than 100%. I mean, being fluent makes a huge difference. I have a lot of fun.
And
often.
Not just fluent, but the accent is right.
Correct. And it's also about understanding deeper things like irony and sarcasm, and being able to communicate them. And often, humor is a very difficult thing to translate. I'm able to think in the Zulu idiom and communicate on that platform. And often I struggle to translate to myself from one to the other. I have to think in the one or the other one. Yeah.
Now, how did your interest in KaziNomics start?
So I'm a migrant worker. I moved to Johannesburg, and I started off in the marketing industry, very much focusing on the mass market. And in that work, increasingly realized there was this huge sector that we didn't which we don't realize. It's an invisible economy. In fact, I quote in my book Mbungseni, who says illiterate societies or unwritten societies are about excavating silence, which I love that thing. And it's about excavating the silence of these environments. They're not quantitatively measured. And in my work for a range of different companies, we had these huge success stories in developing products for these sectors. One of them was we created a 1.5 billion rand industry for Parmalat cheese slices in the fast food sector, what they call gordas. And it never existed before. Everyone was looking at the formal kind of burgers or that kind of element, and we recognized that. And slowly, as we developed more and more of these case studies for our clients, I realized kind of two components. On the one hand, was the scale of this of these businesses, and there's a sense generally that they are survivalist and subsistence businesses, which I realize it's a huge mistake. There are really very successful micro businesses out there, but because they're in an informal environment or because they are informal, often we don't recognize the scale of them, how much money they make, how profitable they are. And as I started realizing this, I started wanting to do more research into this. And I believe the solution to South Africa is going to be in this informal sector. We're never going to create 1 million jobs in the formal sector.
So this is about 100 billion rand business at the moment, the informal sector. Is that correct?
Oh, it's much bigger than that. I think if you just look at the FMCG, the grocery sector, that's worth about 150 billion rand, going through about 100,000 what we call spaza shops. The food industry, what I call Gasikos industry, is worth about 90 billion rand a year with about 50,000 outlets. Then there's the hair industry, the salons, as people call them, saloons, and the building industry. I mean, I covered off each one of these. Even the muti industry, muti hawkers selling herbal medicine, is worth about 3.5 billion rand a year. So there are so many. If we added them all together, I'm not even going to try and add them. I just looked at specific ones that I've touched on through my work.
So they can start small, like selling fruit by the side of the street, and develop and make it into a big business?
Yeah, so one of the businesses I profile is a guy who grew up in Mozambique and moved to South Africa, and now he sells between 15 and 20,000 rand a day's worth of fruit and veggies. He employs 2 staff members. He's bought himself a Nissan Bakkie, and he's running a very successful grocery business. And this is the kind of thing, we drive past this guy and we see him selling the groceries on the side of the road, and the first thing we think is that his veggies aren't as fresh as, for instance, at Woolworths or Pick n Pay. And the reality, he's at the fresh food market, every fruit and veg market every morning at 4 a.m. So his veggies are actually fresher because, and his consumer recognizes that his veggies are fresher. Often they're more expensive than the Pick n Pay literally behind his back. Because he's selling fresher, he's doing portion control elements that suit the diets and the needs and the family sizes of his customer. So it's generally very geared. These businesses are very geared to understanding lifestyles, tastes and flavors, budget constraints or portion control. So they're all quite sophisticated. So if you look at the veg hawker, you may say, oh well, that person is a struggling person, yet they can be earning between 3 and 10,000 rand a month profit, and yet we don't recognize it.
So they may be bringing in products from the formal sector, and they may actually be selling to the formal sector as well.
100%. So I think this is one of the mistakes we also make, is that we kind of feel that they are, that we don't see them as customers too. Enterprises, and yet in some cases they should be, and we should be recognizing them as that and giving them the due respect and servicing them appropriately.
Now, Kazi means...
Kazi comes from the word ekasi, which is from the word lokasi, the Afrikaans word for the township. Okay. And so my first book was called KaziNomics, and this was obviously KaziNomic Revolution. And it was built around the Kasi suddenly became cool and trendy. If you came from the Kasi, you're a Kasi boy, Kasi girl. And the informal sector is not only in the townships and the inner cities, it's all around us, in the suburbs and wherever it might be. But I chose to utilize that word as a general descriptor in terms of the economies of these informal marketplaces, the Kasi. Okay.
Now, Ubuntu, I think, forms quite a basis for this. So do you think that there's a loyalty to these traders, and when they become bigger, do they retain a loyalty to their smaller suppliers?
Sure. So yes, I mean, I wrote one of my chapters is called Umphakathi, which means the insiders, which is the word for community, which I just, it's such a powerful way of describing community, is that we are all insiders. So I talk quite a lot about community in the different ways it plays in life, but also from a business perspective. You'll see a row of hawkers all in the same street, all selling for the same price. And how do they compete with each other? And generally, they have relationships. So they're a community on the one hand. So, for instance, the vegetable trader I mentioned is part of a hawker association in Tembisa, and they all pay towards a security guard. They each pay 50 rand a day towards a security guard that 10 of them all then employ. And they're part of this community that looks after each other. They don't compete with each other. They see the competition as the Pick and Pay that's just down the road, or the Fruit and Veg City, because that's not part of this community. At the same level, the community buys from these people. Often, as I said earlier, prices are more expensive because they have this relationship. These traders are part of the community. And so the sense of community is a very powerful one between traders, and gives them often a competitive edge, or means they don't infringe on each other's territory. So in the food industry, one person will focus on, say, selling liver, and other one on tripe, and then a third one on kind of a shisanyama steak and stuff like that, and they'll recognize each other. And I spend a lot of time looking at that, because it is one of the secrets of this business sector, but it's also something that the formal sector should be looking at, is how how are we part of these communities? What are our responsibilities to these communities, and what is a business community we should be building?
So at what stage do you think the government will want to step in and get some revenue from this?
Sure. So I kind of looked at three audiences in terms of writing this book. The one is the general kind of business sector, and what are the opportunities in the informal sector, both partnering as well as making business opportunities. Another one was very much the township, micro-business or entrepreneur sector, of trying to encourage them and show people opportunities in that sector. The third one is very much around municipalities and government, and there's two components to that. The first is, I think there are huge opportunities for the government to stimulate these businesses by changing regulations, by encouraging investment in these businesses, giving them some sort of guarantee that their business can continue. But at the same time, this is a huge opportunity for taxation. Obviously, this is a sector that is completely unmeasured in terms of and there's no penetration of it. And I covered this issue quite a lot with the people I profiled, in terms of saying, would you pay tax, and would you pay rent for the space you've got on the street, or whatever it might be? And every single one of them were prepared to do that on condition that they were being recognized and that they were getting services for this kind of thing. And I think that there's a big opportunity to, if we take the sector seriously and we invest in the sector, we regulate properly from a government perspective around it, that it is the carrot and stick. If a business recognizes that I have tenure of the space that I have my little business, and yes, I must follow things like hygiene and all of those typical things, and maybe register for tax, but in return I get something, then almost every one of them would pay this. The other thing, however, is that also these businesses are paying large amounts of VAT for all the things that they purchase. I mean, there's a hawker in downtown Joburg who buys 40 bags of 12.5 kg flour every single week from the local wholesaler. Now, he's obviously paying VAT on that. And I think another component that we don't recognize is that we claim to have 28% unemployment in this country, which is incorrect. We have 27 or 28% formal unemployment. We are not recognizing how many people in this sector are actually employed, earning money, and looking after families, employing people and paying those people. And I believe that as a drag on the economy, the informal sector has a very powerful role in terms of, we can't just rely on, if a third of the people are unemployed in this country, then we have this other survival net that is actually helping drive the formal sector, because there's incomes there, employing people, making people eat and live comfortable lives.
GG Alcock, thank you so much for coming in. This is fascinating. So if you want to know more about this, you should read the book. My guest is GG Alcock, and the book is KaziNomic Revolution, The Rise of Africa's Informal Economies. And that was it for this edition of Talking Books. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.